Boldwood presents Blood of the Innocents, written by Michael Jecks and read by John Telfer. Prologue. Rouen, 5th of April, 1356. Agonized screams erupted as the cleaver rose again, and Thomas de Sully shivered, appalled. The executioner was a forger, offered a pardon if he killed these men. His life for 4. It must have seemed an easy arrangement, but now this was a nightmare. His soul clutched in the devil's talons. The cleaver trembled in his drunken grip. Thomas could puke. The blade slammed down, and blood flew, while his victim wailed in despair. Thomas felt the bile rise as the executioner jerked the blade free, hefted it, and brought it down again, eyes closed to block the hideous sight. What was his victim's crime? To have been the devoted servant of King Charles of Navarre, nothing more. Meanwhile, King John watched, laughing with friends. Thomas bent his head, his face hidden by the cowl of his priest's robe. He wished he could shut out the screams as easily as he could shut out the sight. The day had begun well. King Charles was short, but possessed of great charisma and guile, while King John was a mere brute who blustered like a tavern bully. Thomas de Sully, ordained priest and chancellor to Navarre, stood in the great hall as servants moved amongst the guests. Charles was seated to his friends, the Dauphin's right, laughing. Navarre's wit was one of his great strengths, along with penetrating intellect. He may not be a great warrior, but he was shrewd and bold. Colin Doublé, esquire to King Charles, carried a heavy plate to the king and Dauphin, bowing low as he proffered the meats. Thomas's mouth watered, but he would eat later. His duty was to be on hand in case his counsel was needed. About the table were the leading nobles of Normandy, all discussing the defence of the province. There were rumours of fresh English forces gathering, and against those savages the province must unite. The Dauphin was growing more closely allied with Charles. He wanted the approval of his lords. It was too late for his father, but the Dauphin hoped a little Navarrese charisma would benefit him. Thomas and King Charles had planned this banquet in detail. The Comte d'Harcourt must be rewarded for helping during the attempt to remove King John and replace him with his son. The Lord of Graville should be further away, but not so far as to be insulting. Guillaume de Menmar should be... Bernard, the servant, glanced at Arnaud, and Thomas heard it too, a rattling. He pursed his lips. This gathering had been planned to the minutest detail, yet some fool was destroying the ambience. Someone in the kitchen, no doubt, clattering pots and pans, except, he felt rising alarm, it sounded more like armour. There came a thunderous crash, the door was flung wide, and a party of men-at-arms marched in, swords drawn. Those at the tables reached for their weapons. Colin dropped his platter and moved to Navarre, even as the king stalked in, his brutish face moving with rage as he entered, glaring about him. "Put down your weapons, you treasonous bastards!" he roared. Thomas shrank back into the shadow of a pillar. The king's brother, the Duc d'Orléans, was there, as was Anjou and the Marshal of France. To have such men and an army of men-at-arms spoke of disaster. The marshal stood at the king's side. "You heard your king! Put down your weapons!" They obeyed. They had no choice. Men held their hands open in compliance, but the tension was palpable. "You fucking traitor!" King John hissed at King Charles, who sat unmoving but deathly pale. King John's temper was legendary. "You deserve to die!" Colin Doublé pulled his dagger free, but before he could strike, 2 men-at-arms grabbed him, one pommelling his head, and Colin's legs buckled. The Dauphin dared to speak with disdain. "What's the meaning of this? My guests are safe under my roof." The king ignored him. "Take that scum out of my sight!" King Charles was hauled to his feet and dragged out, his esquire behind him. It was the signal. Thomas saw Harcourt shoved back, a sword at his throat. Graville was beaten to the ground and kicked until he was silent, while a servant protecting him was knocked senseless. He had seen enough. Thomas slipped through the door behind him. Soon he was in the streets of Rouen. When he heard running feet and shouting, he quickly pulled into a doorway. Arnaud and Bernard ran past. Thomas waited. Hot on their heels, he heard many boots, the jingle and clatter of men in armour. Soon men-at-arms hurtled past. For a moment he thought they might see him, but they carried on. Wearing his chain of office and rich velvet hat, he knew he had to conceal himself. He had to escape. How? Later, at the Champ du Pardon, the forger knelt, shaking and weeping, staring at his hands, while the headless bodies of the Comte d'Harcourt, the Lord de Graville, and Guillaume de Mainmar were dragged away to join Colin's at Biorel. There, the heads were spiked on lances overlooking Rouen. "We will be avenged, my king," Thomas wept. Chapter 1. Bordeaux, 5th of July. At first Ed thought it was an obscene painting on a cottage wall. The body was small, with hair the colour of dirty straw, limbs like fragile sticks, wearing a thin shift ripped aside, the legs forced apart, arms outstretched like the crucifixion scenes he had seen on church walls. But this was no painting. Ed stood still, alarm ringing like a tocsin tolling just for him. Men would do murder for shoes or a hat, anything to buy a whore or a jug of ale. Ed knew when to keep quiet. He moved into the shadows, cautiously gripping his dagger. For a man of only 23, he had seen plenty of death. When he was 7, he had seen his father slain and his mother raped and murdered by French pirates. Seeking revenge, he'd joined the chevauchée that secured victories at Crécy and Calais. Men spoke of that glorious campaign in reverential tones, but all he remembered was the butchery, men, women, and children. Later, returning to England, he saw God's judgment. He showed his displeasure. The great pestilence settled in England, taking one life of every 2, so it seemed, before it disappeared. This body was not like those others. He stared for a long time at the black-haired man who rocked on his haunches and moaned to himself, head in hands, almost hidden behind a cart. At first, Ed thought he was perhaps the girl's father. Was he crying or laughing? That was when he heard the shrill, muffled squeal. She was alive! He felt a thrill of rage. The man must surely wrest her from her bonds, he thought. Why didn't he hurry? He was about to go to help when the fellow gave a stunted cry and hurried forward. There was a flash of steel, and the girl's torment was ended. Ed couldn't help but gasp in shock. The man turned, and Ed saw dark hair, wild eyes, a mouth like a gash, and then he bolted like a greyhound with a broken paw, low, hunched in anguish, lurching but swift, while Ed hurried to the girl. "Why?" Ed demanded of the fleeing man, before grabbing his horn and blowing 3 blasts to call for help. As he dropped his horn, a sound came that chilled his blood. It was the giggling of a demon. The town shone like a jewel as the setting sun struck the stones of the church and walls. It sat in the curve of the river, snug and comfortable as a puppy in its basket, the forest behind sheltering it, while precipitous rocky outcrops falling to the river deterred an attack. Those cliffs would put off most, but approaching through the forest was dangerous too. Pits, trenches lined with spikes, spring traps to shatter a man's leg, tripwires that would release swinging steel maces to crush a man's skull. The inventiveness of townspeople was a constant, unpleasant surprise. The wooden bridge over the river had a stone tower protecting it. The leader narrowed his eyes. His sight was failing, but he could make out the bridge's structure. That bridge was the cause of the town's prosperity. If the townspeople were wise, they would have destroyed it, but few were keen to destroy the source of their wealth. Pack horses, carts, wagons, and individuals must pay to use it because it was the only crossing for miles. That was why these men had come. Possess the bridge, and a man would possess the tolls. Berenger Fripper and his men were keen to control both. As Archibald stirred carefully, he wondered whether he was still suited to this work. War was a young man's business. When he caught sight of himself in a mirror, he was often surprised. Bald, grey beard, and so many wrinkles. It seemed but a blink of his eye since he was an eager young monk. "Master, how is it?" "Well enough," Archibald said, concentrating on keeping the mixture moving gently. Mixing dry powders was always nerve-wracking. Ed peered over his shoulder. Archibald raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Have you added the 'if you think you know better, you should set up house and find your own customers'?" Archibald said evenly. "Until then, recall who taught you all you know." He had first met Ed 10 years ago. Then the boy had been a gangling brat. Archibald had adopted him, and since then had come to appreciate his quick mind and wit. More, Ed was devoted to Beatrice, the refugee whom they had discovered marching to Crécy. Archibald had often wondered whether the two would find love or tenderness in each other's arms. But so far, Beatrice and the donkey, Ed's affectionate nickname, appeared as fond of each other as any brother and sister, but no further. Beatrice felt the weight of her extra 5 years, and Ed was content to take his pennies to the whores when he needed to indulge his natural desires. "You taught me all you could," Ed said. Archibald, still stirring gently, said, "What's upset you? You've a face like an alewife whose beer's turned to piss." Ed smiled. "No secrets from you, eh, Gino? I doubt you could manage it." "I found a little girl today. A black-haired, black-bearded man nailed her to a plank like a crucifixion and raped her, then killed her." Archibald winced. "There are many demons in this world." "Yes," Ed said, cutting a loaf in half and scooping out the creamy-coloured crumb. "I summoned the hue and cry, but left them to it." "Good." In England, a man who reported a body would be held to pay a surety while the coroner investigated. Ed didn't want to pay a fine, but more importantly, he didn't want to become a suspect. All too often, a stranger would become the first and only suspect. Ed worked on 2 more loaves, then went to the pot over the fire. He ladled pottage into the makeshift trenchers. Setting them on the table, he pulled his spoon out from under his shirt. "Food, old man," he called. Then, "Beatrice!" Archibald set his mixture aside and took up his pottage as Beatrice walked in. Archibald had first encountered her when Berenger Fripper asked him to look after her. Her father had been executed, she had told him once, and she joined the English because she had little choice. 10 years later, she was an attractive woman. When she sat, Archibald closed his eyes and spoke a few words of thanks for the food. Reopening his eyes, he frowned. "What's in this?" he asked, peering into the trencher. "Wild garlic, peas, some beans, and plenty of good water from further upriver," Ed said. His face tightened momentarily. "I heard some news today. The Black Prince plans another riding out." "Last year he ravaged the south as far as Narbonne. Where this time?" "It slipped his mind to tell me," Ed said sarcastically. "You think he asked me for advice?" "I'd hoped you would learn more." "I did," Ed smiled slowly. "I spoke to Sir John de Sully's esquire. He said that the army will need Serpentine and a Master Genor, but in their absence he'd be content to have you join him." That evening the wind blew sharp and fresh as Pouton made his way home in Don. The peasant had been at market all day. His farm had an abundance of greens and some beans, and he had taken them to Chambéry, but the effort had been back-breaking, and he was looking forward to a seat with a jug of wine to hand before his fire. He pulled his jack tighter about him, the threadbare material little protection against the wind. The road here bent and twisted like a snake through the trees, but it was familiar. He had been walking it for 30 years, man and boy. Over the rumbling complaints from his donkey, the clopping of his hooves, a man's thoughts naturally turned inward. Potin was remembering his neighbour that morning, laughing. Seeing Potin's expression, Hugues pretended it was about his brat who was playing at his feet, but Potin knew the laughter had been directed at him. He had never liked Hugues. The fellow was quick to deride the comments, dress, and behaviour of others. That laughter was aimed at Potin, or he was a Gascon, and now he rehearsed choice rejoinders. If only he had thought to say— Perhaps he heard the creak of the rope, or the wind made the plank clatter against the branches. Whatever it was that caught his attention, his upward glance and gasp of horror made the crows leap into flight, feathers rustling like the winding sheets of a long dead army, their raucous cries, the jeers of devils on the wind. Chapter 2. It was midnight. Berenger felt the chill seep into his bones like oil into a cloth. He studied the town, cloak wrapped tight about him, a figure of deeper darkness in the gloom of night. It was called Uzerche. A young goat-herd they had caught in the hills had been eager to help them. In exchange, they had swiftly ended his pain with a knife. Berenger ensured that it was swift. The men were rested. It was time. Berenger signalled to his sergeant, Charles, and the men rose. The horses and ponies they left with the boys, and the rest, almost 100 men, moved onwards. At this time of night there should be watchmen, but most of the citizens would be asleep. The curfew meant all fires would be smothered. It was the ideal time. Since the disaster of Crécy, mercenaries had taken advantage of the void left by the dead noblemen and men-at-arms who should have enforced the law. These routiers, the dregs of the cesspits of Gascony, Flanders, the Holy Roman Empire, and beyond, embarked on campaigns of murder and looting. These English were used to slaughter. They took what they wanted by force rather than return to England and poverty. Berenger had hoped for a life of ease and peace, but it was shattered, and he blamed God and France. The French could rot. At the bridge 4 men ran forward with scaling ladders. Charles pointed out one sentry, and arrows struck the man in the head, breast, and throat, dead before he could cry out. Berenger had feared that arrows slamming into his mail would wake the garrison, yet all was quiet. The 4 men were followed by another 4, and when Berenger heard the cry of an owl, he knew the tower was theirs. More men, more ladders, now crossing the bridge to the town. The guards were dozing. Not one gave the alarm. Charles led one group, Alfred took another, while beyond him Peter took a third. All bold leaders, each with his own Vintaine of 20. With men like this he could not fail. Berenger's men hurried to the wall, Lois beating him to the ladder. He sprang up the rungs with the agility of a monkey. Berenger felt the familiar roiling in his belly as he set his foot to the first rung. It was not fear, just a premonition and excitement. He climbed to the battlements, stepping quietly onto the inner walkway. 2 guards had been dispatched, both dying where they slept. Lois went to them. Both had already been stabbed by 3, and now Lois opened their throats from ear to ear, grinning all the while as if imitating the appalling wounds. The English scattered. Some went to the nearer guard tower, others went down the steps, quietly hastening to the gates. Berenger followed them, nodding to Charles. Seeing Berenger's approval, Charles hissed, and 3 men went to the timber balks holding the gates. They slid them back into the sockets in the walls, and willing hands pulled the gates wide with a groan from the iron hinges. With whoops of glee, the remaining English fighters burst in. Their boots thundered like waves crashing heavily on a shingle shore, but then their bellows and howls were overwhelmed by the screams of dismay. Men and women slumbering in their beds were woken to the shrieks of their neighbours, to the sounds of doors being axed, timbers broken asunder by blood-crazed English fighters determined to rape and pillage. Berenger watched his men. Once he would have felt pity, but not now. These people were responsible. He felt like a demon watching sinners herded to pits of flames. There was no compassion, only urgency to complete the task. Ahead, he saw a tavern. On either side, houses were broken open and men poured inside. He heard a rising ululation of terror and saw a figure fly through a window. It spun, emitting a mewling noise, and in its wake he heard a cry like a soul in torment. Looking up, he saw a woman with long dark hair, mouth wide, staring as her baby hurtled to the ground. She was jerked back, and he saw her no more, although her screaming continued. The child's neck was broken. Berenger stared. He wanted to feel something for the life ended, but his heart was empty. It could no longer contain anything like mercy. There was only one for whom he felt sadness, and that was himself. He had lost everything he loved or valued. Denisot initially thought Poton's story was the rambling of an old drunkard. Denisot, a thin man with an overlarge nose like a hawk's beak, had dark eyes perpetually narrowed. Some thought it was a device he nurtured to unsettle those accused, for Denisot was the bail, responsible for upholding the law in this troubled land.
"Where was this body?" "At the bend just before the old fish ponds,"
the old man said. Poton was one of those who lived through the last uprising when men rebelled through hunger and poverty. When a man saw his wife and children die of starvation, while the fruits of their efforts went to feed the men-at-arms who infested the lands, it was hardly surprising that he would take up arms. But such fights were short-lived. Their enemies had armour and weapons.
"Nailed to a board by her palms and elbows. Her elbows were bound too."
"Rope as well?"
"Yes, Bale. The nails were poor, with small heads. Perhaps the man who did this thought they wouldn't hold her."
Denisot nodded. Ropes would support her weight and prevent escape. Poton explained that the crosspiece hung from a rope over a tree limb. She hung among the lower branches, her body dangling unsupported. Poton swallowed hard before continuing.
Her face was terrible, Bale."
"You didn't cut her down?"
"She might yet be alive,"
Denisot said. Poton clenched his jaw.
"Carrion birds had feasted. Maybe you know better, but I've seen sheep and cattle eaten like that, and never once were they alive."
"You will have to take me there."
"It is late."
"In the morning, then." Denisot thought for a moment.
"Before you go, were there any signs of men about? You saw nothing of soldiers?" "I saw no English,"
Poton said grimly. Later, when speaking with friends, Poton told how she swung in the tree with every little soughing breeze, but he never mentioned the fingers, how they seemed to move as the cross twisted, the rope squeaking like the doors to hell, how they seemed to beckon him to join her. Chapter 3. The 6th of July. Berenger breakfasted with bread and a flagon of wine. He had taken the house of a woman named Alsace, but he had not raped her. Her attraction lay in the location of her house, nothing more. His men had gathered the townspeople to the square, and now held them back with lance-staves as he trudged along a cleared corridor, his goblet in his hand. At the far end stood a wagon, and Berenger drank before climbing up. Behind the fence of lances the townsfolk stood downcast, many of the women with blood marking their skirts, just as shame marked their souls. One tried to shout, but her voice was gone after the long night of rape. Two others knelt and wailed, one with her arms tightly wrapped around herself as though she was a ball of wool and feared she might unravel entirely. Berenger let his eyes pass over them. The men stood despondent, not daring to meet his or his men's eyes. A priest glowered like a boy thrashed unfairly.
"People of Uzerche," Berenger said, "I am Berenger Fripper, leader of this company. We're not your enemies. We're not here to harm you, but to protect you. There are many who would destroy your town for the pleasure of it. We're not like them. Think of us as your guardians."
Charles, below him, stood eating an apple, watching the crowd with amusement. Berenger continued, "Your king cannot help you. Your lord is dead, and his son is a child still. We will protect the bridge and ensure your safety. I am sure you will support us in our efforts."
"We don't need protection,"
an old man said. Charles motioned with his chin, and the nearest soldier reached for him, but Berenger snapped a command, and the man fell back.
"We have a clearer idea of your danger. We can guard you and the bridge so that you come to no harm."
They stared at him, dull with the horrors of the last hours. They had been beaten, robbed, their womenfolk raped, some of them many times, and others slain.
"You are sent from the devil himself."
Berenger scoured the crowd for the speaker. It was the priest who stood, bent, gripping a staff. Sunken cheeks, sallow complexion, and washed-out blue eyes spoke of his age. Beside him, another man in clerical garb tried to hush him. Berenger spat.
"If you were pious, perhaps you could have saved people from the plague when that coursed through these lands. No doubt you were fondling the tits of your favourite whore, while the folk watched their loved ones die." "I have no whore. I am a man of God." "You are a man, no better and no worse than any other. God has forsaken us all. We wallow here in our shame and guilt."
In his mind's eye he saw her again, Marguerite. His resolve stiffened.
"You are a heretic. You will burn in—"
Berenger pointed at him.
"Did you see the plague come? We did. The suppurating buboes, the women and children succumbing. Do you dare to say God was responsible? Because if you do, I'll swear that God is no God of mercy, and I'll curse you to the devil."
The priest opened his mouth, but the guard had heard enough. He struck with his lance's butt, and blood erupted from the priest's mouth as he fell.
"Does anyone else have any questions?"
Berenger demanded. The wine hit his stomach like a torch igniting dry thatch. He could feel the flames licking upwards, warming his belly and breast.
"What shall we do with them?"
Charles asked, indicating the crowd.
"Send them to hell for all I care,"
Berenger muttered. Yes, wine was good. It numbed the senses that had known happiness, removing the memories of love, but also of those whom he had killed, and whose faces invaded his every dream. He didn't want to feel their pain. He didn't want to feel anything. Sir John de Sully had been a fighter all his life. He was already over 70, but his zest for life was undimmed. There was no point spending all one's time preparing for death. Better to consider each day as the last and behave gloriously, honourably, and generously as a knight should.
"It is confirmed," he said.
"The prince has ordered the muster, Sir John," Richard Bequier, his esquire, said. "He leaves today for La Réole. We are to join him there."
"Good."
Sir John gave a broad smile.
"Then buy what we need for the journey, and have a saddle-maker look at my second-best saddle. The cantle is damaged. We need to let the men know about the muster."
"I already have. The sentinels are outside."
"Good. Bring them in."
Sir John sat on his chair and eyed them. Grand'Arse was a vast figure. While Bécaire beckoned the steward to fetch wine, Grand'Arse cast an appraising eye over the sideboard, the display of pewter and silver, and the tapestries hanging on the walls.
"You can't have them, Grand'Arse."
The centener grinned.
"Aye, I'll wait until you've no further use for them."
"Why? So you can fill your belly? In God's name, your paunch is the size of a calf already."
"This body is honed and trained, Sir John. I only eat that I might give you better service and increase your glory,"
Grand'Arse said, patting his belly, eyes twinkling. Sir John shook his head.
"You're old, Grand'Arse. Are you sure this isn't too much for you?" "I'm 20 years younger than you, Sir John."
"Aye, go swive a goat." The knight chuckled. "I have plenty of fight left, if the good Lord spares me."
"Aye, and so have I,"
Grand'Arse said. He took the mazer of wine offered by the steward and drank, smacking his lips appreciatively.
"If you have a little more of this to bring to battle, I'll stay at your side."
The other centener, Henry de Berkhamsted, drank sparingly. He was a lean man of middle height with hooded eyes. Sir John knew him to be shrewd, and better, his archers were devoted to him.
"We have too few men," Sir John considered. "With the prince leading," Grand'Arse said, "we'll match any French host."
"True enough, but I want more," Sir John said.
"Aye,"
Grand'Arse sighed. That would deplete his profits. He was paid to recruit men. If he collected a smaller force, the remainder of the money fell into his purse.
"If you are sure, sir."
"You have a few days. Soon we shall be travelling to La Réole." The two centeners nodded, all levity gone. "The Duke of Lancaster will sail for Brittany shortly. Our king's ally, Charles of Navarre, has been imprisoned by King John, and the king's son is laying siege to Navarre's men at Évreux. Lancaster will attack in the north to raise that siege. At the same time, we shall advance. The French will be torn should they meet us or concentrate their efforts on Lancaster. And while they wonder, King Edward will attack Flanders, then join Lancaster, and together they'll threaten Paris. All the while we sow dissension and misery." Grand'Arse gave a low growl.
"That's to my liking."
"We will also have guns," Sir John added.
"Shite,"
Grand'Arse muttered. Henry made no comment, but the tightening of his lips indicated his displeasure. "I know, I don't like it myself," Sir John said. He drained his cup and waved it to be refilled. "They scare me, but by God, they scare the enemy more. We will bring Archibald Tanner with us. He will be responsible for the guns and powder." "How long do we have?" Henry asked.
"A matter of days. Expect fewer days rather than more."
Grand'Arse hoiked his belt upwards as he considered this.
"I'll have John of Essex organise carts and wagons for my Vintaine. If there's any spare, Henry, I'll tell you. What else?"
"We'll need wine and ale for the first weeks until we can forage for more."
"Aye."
"And men. You need more men."
"Aye."
"Why so despondent, Grand'Arse?" Henry demanded after the silence had dragged. "You look kin to a whipped hound."
"I was thinking, it'll be tough teaching him how to march and fight in a few days. I miss Berenger. He was always good at beating the dullards into shape."
"I last saw him in Calais," Henry said.
"That was a long time ago,"
Sir John said.
"Last time I passed, his place was shut up. I think he must be dead."
"Many are," Grand'Arse said. Great blue-black angry clouds clung to the sky as Denisot and Poton set off. The humidity built, and Denisot was aware of the sweat trickling in the thundery air. Their journey was not long. They reached the body within the hour. A gust of wind rattled the branches as Denisot stopped, and he saw the plank turn until the eyeless, ravaged face of the girl faced him.
"Dear God,"
Denisot muttered and crossed himself. "Let's free the poor chit." The rope had been tied securely. Poton set his knife to it, and it parted with a ripping sound as the fibres sheared.
"Do you recognize her?"
Denisot asked. Poton shrugged emphatically.
"Don't think so."
Nor I, Denisot murmured. She had been a pretty little thing. Her hair was that red gold that catches the sun with sparkles of fire, and it was thick and curled madly over her shoulders. She would have been 3.5, perhaps 4 feet tall in life, but the horrible damage done to her had left her looking shrunken. Up close, her injuries made even the bale gag. Her flesh had been torn away in long strips. Her chin was raw to the bone, her elbows too. Each injury had been expanded by the pecking beaks of the crows and ravens, but the initial scars were still visible.
"What happened to her, eh?"
Poton asked.
"She was dragged here behind a horse,"
Denisot guessed.
"That's why she lost so much flesh.
Look, there is gravel in the wounds." Poton peered more closely, nodding, while Denisot studied the body.
"She was 10 or 11, I would guess," he reflected. "Who would have done such a thing? And why?"
Denisot lifted her skirts.
"I expect she was raped."
He studied the road, but the roadway was well used. After the dry spell of the last few weeks, there was no mud to be churned, only dry soil. He could tell nothing from the ground. There were many powerful men who would think nothing of removing annoying peasants. But a child? A nobleman would take a man's head off without thinking, but to drag a child for some distance and then murder her in this barbaric manner, that spoke of brutality beyond anything Denisot had seen. Neither guessed that this was only the first of the coming horrors they must endure. Chapter 4. The fat man smiled beatifically at passers-by. His purse was deliciously heavy, and it rattled intriguingly. Men eyed his purse more than his face. Not that it surprised Grandas. He was fully aware of everyone about him. Rather than his usual leather jerkin and stained coif, Grandas wore a rich coat with long sleeves and a cloak trimmed with fur. A felt hat set the seal on the image he wanted to portray. Thieves, cut purses, clubmen of all forms roamed the darker alleys, and Grandas was their ideal target. He entered an alley between 2 towering buildings. Soon he heard footsteps following him. Many, seeing a man with a gross belly like Grandas's, would consider him an easy gull. Only a merchant would be so fat, and merchants rarely risked their own safety when confronted by a bold fellow with a knife. Grandas put on a spurt of speed, hurtling along before whirling and showing his sword. 2 men behind him hesitated when he smiled genially. "You want something?" he asked cheerily.
"Your purse! Throw it to us!"
the younger of the 2 said. He had an oval face with a narrow chin. His hood left his face shadowed, but Grandas could see his eyes moving nervously. He was bright enough to fear a trap.
"What, this purse? You want my coins?" "Just untie it and hurry,"
the other said. He was built more heavily, his thick greying hair worn long. His clothes were neatly patched. Grandas thought him a sailor who had fled his ship. Few soldiers could sew that well. He thought the 2 father and son.
"I'll give you 1 each, and if you refuse, you'll regret it all your lives," he said.
"Untie it," the first said. His attention focused on the leather bag as though it contained the secrets of eternal life and alchemy mixed.
"Ah, I cannot,"
Grandas said regretfully,
"but I'll give you your reward. You deserve that."
He stepped forward as the 2 blows were struck.
"You didn't hit them too hard, did you?"
he asked of his accomplices. The 2 would-be robbers lay on the ground. Dogbreath glared at him.
"Why? You think we'd bilk you of your fee?"
Dogbreath said, a scrawny man whose voice was a whine that reminded Grandas of a nail on a slate. He looked like a cur that had been kicked beyond submission into rabid fury.
"Only if you thought you could get away with it," Grandas said. He grinned. "But you know you wouldn't, so you won't, will you? Now, take these 2 scroats back to the camp and get them ready. Hopefully they'll be able to walk after a while."
"Oh, aye,
I'll get them to dance,"
Dogbreath muttered. He flourished his own knife.
I can tickle them up just help them up and get them back to camp,
Grandas said. He glowered at Dogbreath, then at the other man, John of Essex.
What are you grinning at?
Nothing, Vintener.
Good. Wipe that smirk off your face and get these shites back to camp.
He had run from the terror of the north, seeking peace here far from the king's men, only to throw himself into this lunacy. Thomas de Sully could have wept from frustration and fear as he helped the other priest away from the square. No one moved to help them as they hobbled down the lane.
No. Oh, take me home, the priest mumbled through broken teeth and mashed lips. Père Albert, I'll send a boy to the physician.
The priest looked down at his hands, confused.
My staff. In the name of all that is holy, I dropped my staff when that godless, murdering swine hit me. He's lucky I'm not 10 years younger. I'd break his face.
He looked at Thomas with quick decisiveness.
No, take me to the physician, and then seek your lord's lands. You will be safe in Navarre.
What of you?
I will live, unless I die. And if I die, I will die cursing these heathens, till they know the terror everlasting damnation will bring,
Père Albert said, as firmly as his ravaged mouth would allow.
Let me take you home.
The priest gripped his arm fiercely.
These are my people. You have no place here. If these murderers learn you are the Chancellor of King Charles of Navarre, you will be held until they can force a ransom from someone. And if they get nothing, they will torture you, kill you for fun. You know what these men are, mercenaries. All they care about is gold and silver. You must flee. How? Take the road west, first towards Périgueux, then south by degrees. If you reach Bordeaux, you may find a ship to take you to Galicia and avoid the mountains. The English are friends to your king, are they not?
Thomas nodded. Sometimes. I am not sure of anyone now. That evening Grandas stood in the drizzle, surveying his recruits. He never thought he would say it, but he was glad to have Clip and Dogbreath in his centane. Clip was a wizened fellow with a voice permanently whining with dissatisfaction. Dogbreath had the unhealthy complexion of a man locked in a cell for too many years. However, both were more comforting than these newer recruits. They were not a sight to inspire a man.
"You're lucky!"
he roared.
"I've saved you from a life of brief pleasure and swift justice. Every one of you is a miserable shit who deserves a jail cell, but I'm giving you a chance of glory. Your names will live forever, like Arthur and his knights."
"Who?" one man started, but Dogbreath appeared before him, grinning wickedly.
"Do you like taking a shit?"
It apparently occurred to the fellow that there was potentially no good answer.
"Because if you don't want to listen to your Vintener, there's always a job needs doing. Digging a new latrine or moving shit from a full one,"
Dogbreath said nastily.
"I've seen a man fall in and drown."
"Think of that," he smiled, displaying his foul gums, and, from the expression on the young recruit's face, exhaling. It was rumoured that the air from Dogbreath's mouth was more noxious than that of an army latrine. Grandas looked at John of Essex, the man who now called himself John Hawkwood. He was chewing a piece of dried meat, eyeing the men without enthusiasm.
"I know," Grandas said. "A fair few have skills with knife or sword. Who's fought for the king before?"
He stared at a tall, lean man with mousy hair who had given his name as Robin of London.
"You're an archer, aren't you?"
Robin shook his head.
"I know nothing about fighting. I'm just a trader in cloths. I was brung here without knowing—" "Really?"
Grandas walked closer. He took Robin's hands. His right hand had calluses on the first 3 fingers. The left held a ridge of scarred skin on the side of the forefinger's knuckle.
"You're an archer," he said. "Good. You can show us what you like." "I'm no good with a bow."
Robin said, his voice low and angry. Grandart smiled. "You'll be a fucking star with all that hard skin, lad," he said, "or I'll peel it off your fingers with a knife. Understand?" "Yes. Yes, Vintener." Robin stared at him with real hatred. "Yes, Vintener." It sounded like a curse. "Good," Grandart said, clapping his hands. "Now, who else have we got here?" The father and son from Bordeaux shuffled unhappily. After questioning them, Grandart learned that the father's name was Pierre and his son was Felix. They declared that they were in Bordeaux for the market and had been robbed, but Grandart doubted that. The boy had the marks of shackles at wrist and ankle. They would need watching, he decided. Behind them was a taller man with lowered brows and suspicious deep-set eyes. His beard and hair were dark. Grandart pointed at him. "What's your name?" "Imbert." "Have you used a bow?" "Sometimes." The man looked away as though that was the end of his interview, and Grandart sighed to himself. Beyond Imbert stood another couple, one a short, grinning fellow of perhaps 25, and a taller, slimmer, more serious fellow. "Who are you?" The shorter man was almost as fat as Grandart himself, and his smile was as expansive as the sky itself. "I am called Gilles Vintener," he said. "Why are you here?" Grandart asked. "Well, I've heard how much money others have made from the raids. I live in a small village in Oxfordshire, you see, and I thought I might as well come see the world, make some money, save a bit for when I settle down." Grandart looked him up and down. The lad was well dressed, with soft woolen hosen, a shirt of fine muslin, his coat hardy cut from strong but soft linen. "You're the son of a rich man," he said. "Nay, only a hard-working freeman." "Then you robbed him, eh? If not, someone else. Keep an eye on your purses, boys, while this one's around." "Who are you?" This to the last, a grinning young fellow with clear grey eyes. "I'm Nick Vintener." "God's bollocks, was there ever such a collection of short-arsed, fat little wastrels gathered together in one place?" Grandart wondered aloud. He walked back to the top of the line, shaking his head. Among the 15, there were more jailbirds than freemen, but that was often the way when a man went recruiting in town. Those who put their names forward did so in the hope of a pardon or winning their freedom. "Well," he said later, when he was sitting with his feet towards the fire, gripping a jug of cider, "what do you think, Essex?" "They'd sooner stab your paunch than your enemies," Hawkwood said. "You could be right. If you want my advice, I've been at this job a while, boy," Grandart growled. "Of course," Hawkwood said, and closed his mouth. "Well, I wouldn't wish to insult you. You know your job perfectly well." Grandart squirmed. "Aye, true enough, but I need to know you're the right sort of material too. So what were you thinking, boy?" "First, I think you should use my name." "John Hawkwood. Remember that name, Grandart. It'll be famous one day. And I'll be sergeant in charge of the Royal Horse. Well, I'd have guards keep an eye for 5 to 10 men trying to escape." "Bollocks! You're probably right." Clip snored and mumbled, then rolled over. A tree root stuck in his back. He had slept on sandy beaches, he had slept on ploughed fields, he had slept on roadways, but he had always found it difficult to sleep on roots. He'd picked this spot because it looked soft and inviting, but the grass concealed lumps that would have tested a man in full armour. Clip had no chance. He was about to sit up when he saw a shape moving. It was a man silently stepping between the rest of the sleeping Vintaine. Clip saw the man elaborately lift his leg over one, then pause when another nearby grunted and muttered in his sleep. "Where are you going?" Clip wondered. He recognized Imbert. Imbert was a big man, and he was close enough to clobber Clip before any of the others could wake. Clip closed his eyes in case Imbert saw them glint. Thus, when there was a thud like a lead maul striking a log and a soft sound like a body collapsing, Clip saw none of it. When he opened his eyes, there was no sign of Imbert. However, there was a louder snoring where he had been. When Clip peered in that direction, there was a new body on the grass with no blanket. Grandas, some yards away, farting and chuckling in a dream. Only one other seemed to be awake. When Clip glanced at Robin, he was sure an eye was open and watching him. Chapter 5 7th of July. Denisot pursed his lips when he saw the familiar figure waiting for him. Ethor was built like the prior's barns, massively. His shoulders would have suited a bull, but his features were kindly. He was diplomatic and competent, keeping disputes between the ecclesiastical community and the people of Dom to a minimum. A visit from him generally heralded an infringement of the priory's rights, but at least Ethor was reasonable. However, with the crucified body, Denisot had enough to deal with today. He hoped this was a simple matter.
"My friend," he said as he approached, "I'm glad to see you."
"You won't be," Ethor said. "I have no good news."
"Nor have I,"
Denisot said.
"We have discovered a child's body."
"You will soon have more," Ethor said uncompromisingly. Denisot frowned, leading the way to a bench before his house, from where he could see the roadway, calling for food and drink. While they waited, Denisot spoke of the body Potin found.
"Crucified? In God's name, that is the work of the devil, or his agents on earth,"
Denisot agreed heavily.
"I took her to church, and she lies there now.
This afternoon I shall call the villagers together to discuss the matter."
"I can help you,"
Ethor said.
"We've heard that Uzerche is taken by the English."
Denisot was close to profanity at that news.
"This is certain? I had not heard of any raids."
"You know how the mercenaries scout to seek their victims?" Ethor growled.
"I dare say a small group scouring the land for booty found your girl and killed her."
Denisot's wife, Gaillarde, appeared with a tray of cheese and one-day loaf. She set a jug of wine and 2 mazers near Ethor, pointedly ignored her husband, pouring for Ethor and leaving Denisot's cup empty. Her job done, she returned inside.
Ethor laughed. "I've seen your maid, Suzette. You haven't stabbed her with your lance. The harpy would be glad if I did. She'd have something to complain about. Gaillard would know if I dared."
Ethor chuckled. "I see. So what's the matter with her, then?" Denisot gave an emphatic shrug.
"She's a woman. When I discover what makes women unhappy, I will sell the cure and become as rich as a cardinal."
The two sipped wine. Denisot cocked an eye.
"So, what of Uzerche?"
"It was taken at night. The English went through the town like plums through a hound, burning and slaughtering."
"What now?" "They'll ravage the place and then move on. There's no telling where to next, but it could be here."
Denisot nodded.
"I'll tell the villagers to prepare."
Archibald was almost finished. He had already cleaned and greased the 2 Ribodekins, his latest pride and joy. These 3-barreled guns were set on small carriages. They were no good at any range, but as enemies came closer, their fire was devastating. He patted his great gun as if petting a hound, then stood wiping his hands as Grandas approached.
"If you grow your paunch, you won't find a belt to fit," Archibald said.
He pulled off his coif and rubbed his shaven head.
"There's times I dislike you."
"Rare enough, I trust," Archibald grinned.
"Aye, I usually hate you,"
Grandas growled. Archibald studied the centiner.
"What is it? You look like you bit a raisin and found it was a sloe. You don't have 82 men and only 3 Vinteners."
82?
You only need 4 Vinteners, then. You can see to the last."
Grandas snorted.
"As centiner, I'm paid for 5 Vintaines. I can lead one, but I need another man. I wondered, Could you leave the guns to Ed and Beatrice and— No. Only till we find someone else. I can't even string a bow. Besides, they're terrified of me. They think I'm associated with the devil, superstitious fools. Who else can I ask? Grandas demanded petulantly. I'll need another man. Merge them, make 4 of the 5, and look to the 4th Vintaine yourself. But as I said, yes, it means losing some money, Archibald leered. That would be a blow, wouldn't it?
Denisot had to bellow at the top of his voice over the hubbub. He stood before the church, the dead girl at his feet. The interior of the church was too small for all to view the body.
The English are here, he said. They have Uzerche, and they must have come past us to have killed this poor child.
The priest shook his head and crossed himself.
It is abhorrent to crucify a child, to pollute the image of Christ's death.
It's a foul way to murder, no matter what, the fat peasant Nicolas said.
The man who did this should be broken on the wheel. Who knows this child?
Denisot said. He was keen to get the matter of the body put away so that the men could discuss the town's survival.
I do not know her,
the priest said, studying the body.
Someone must,
Denisot declared, raising his voice.
Come! Does no one recall seeing her on the road? At market?
Ithor said, They are all murderers and thieves, those routiers.
They might have discovered her 20 miles away and brought her as a marching wife.
No one recognizes her, Nicolas said.
She must have a pauper's grave.
So, what of the English?
We should at least ask neighbouring towns whether anyone has gone missing, Denisot said. We should send to Chambéry or Sussac.
There was grumbling from the crowd, but the priest's agreement settled the matter. However, when it came to finding a man to take the message, no one met his eye. Denisot sighed.
I shall go.
Business moved on to the threat of the mercenaries.
Has anyone heard anything from Uzerche?
I heard from old Rimond that he saw 30 or more men in armour,
Talibot said. He was an anxious-looking man, grey-featured after losing his wife and 2 sons in the plague, and now he squinted permanently, as if peering at the world from behind a veil of tears. An amiable man, Rimond lived to the south, a quarter of the way to Uzerche itself. He held a small patch of land as a free man. Talibot continued.
He said he saw them about the last hour of daylight. He had no idea who they were, so he hid, just in case.
They had no children with them, Denisot said.
You'd have to ask him.
Chapter 6, 8th of July. Berenger rose early. He feared no one living. With a sword at his side and his padded coat with hardened leather breastplate, he felt safe anywhere in France. But the dead, they were different. In his dreams he saw them again, all those whose lives he had ended. Boys protecting their father's farms. A girl, when Berenger caught a fleeting glimpse and thought it was a man attacking him. The dead and mutilated visited him at night. It was only the wine that protected him from them. And her. There was a body in the corner of a building, and he slowed at the sight of torn skirts, bared breasts, and spread legs. Another woman dead. He lengthened his stride as he approached the gate, and hardly slowed as he mounted the steps to the walkway.
You can go,
he said to the yawning guard. Lois had joined Berenger in Guyenne. He was hardy, but not the brightest, and his pale face was growing haggard. English and Low Countries fighters laughed at his gangling limbs and credulity, and he had often been the butt of their malicious jokes. Nodding gratefully, Lois spread his hands. Long hours gripping his spear had turned his fingers into claws. He jerked his head over the landscape.
Nothing moving, Fripp?
He lumbered down the stone steps, leaving Berenger alone, staring at the bridge over the river. The river defined this little town. It had slashed through the ground here like a surgeon's knife, although not so neatly, gouging a long finger pointing northwards, with the bridge at the tip of the fingernail. Although the weather had been mild, the river was still full, and its thundering could be heard almost everywhere in the town. This place was wealthy, and the wealth came from that little timber bridge. "Fripp!" It was his second-in-command, Charles. The fair-haired Englishman came up the stairs. "A fine morning. No trouble? A couple of the boys got frisky with a maid, but she wasn't badly injured," Charles said easily. "I had her sent home." "Did you check to see she was safe?" "Why? She was only a French maid." "Not the woman who lies dead down there, then? You should keep your men under tighter control," Berenger snapped. His head felt heavy, thoughts sluggish. "We don't want the townspeople rising against us." "They'll regret it if they do," Charles said. "We'll keep them down." "Perhaps. But it would be better not to have to." Charles was smiling again. "Too much peace will make the men lazy." Only 10 years before he would have corrected Charles. It was pointless to inflict more suffering than was necessary. The consequences could be revolt, and the need to use even more force to quash it. "The men need their release, Fripp. You know that as well as any." Berenger stared away. His face bore a ragged scar, his shoulder had a star-shaped wound where a bolt had passed through. Yes, he had endured enough battles to know that men needed release. Soldiery needed women for sex just as they needed wine and ale, and the one inspired a desire for the other. But that was no justification for unnecessary destruction. "Any man found raping a woman will be handed to the woman's family for their revenge according to the customs of the land," he said. "I won't have our position here threatened by one man's lust." "The men may resent that." "Then they can see me. They know where I am." Berenger stiffened his back as he stared at the view. Below him, trees waved in the breeze. Cool air filled with the scent of fish and cooking rose from below, and he sniffed it like a hound tasting the odour of a heart in the wind. For a moment his memories faded, and he felt the joy of emptiness, no pain, only calmness. He closed his eyes, expecting to feel Charles's stab, and at last find the rest of eternity. It would mean peace, finally. He longed for that blow. When Charles left the wall, Berenger felt desolated to be alive. Chapter 7. Thomas de Sully was exhausted when he reached Thiviers. It was a small town. It had a wall, but that would be little defence against men such as those who had carried the walls at Uzerche. He found an inn, and as the curfew rang he shared a soft mattress with a grunting peasant whose dialect was so harsh Thomas understood fewer than one word in every 3. Perhaps that was partially due to the wine he had drunk with his pottage and bread. This being a Friday, he eschewed the proffered meats with disapproval. For a long time he stared at the ceiling, mourning the loss of his master and his possessions on fleeing Rouen. He must make his way to Navarre. There he would be safe. The French would find it difficult to break into the little kingdom. He felt the tenderness in his feet turn to heat. Although he had travelled widely, that had been mostly on horseback. These last few weeks had tested his poor body more than he could have imagined. It had seemed easy at first, just slogging on, but since Uzerche, the miles had felt harder. He was not as young as once he had been. With luck, he would make his way to the coast, pick up a ship, and leave France. If possible, he would never return. He closed his eyes and was soon asleep. He would not have dropped off so swiftly.